This is the new 2020 iPad Pro. Pretty awesome, but is it a worthwhile upgrade? Let's find out. Hello, my name is Brad. I review tech for creative professionals, illustrators, designers, anybody who's ever lied to their client about making the logo bigger. Oh yeah, it's totally bigger than it was before. I'd like to thank the sponsor for today's video, which is me. I'm the sponsor. If you want some of the best rated courses on Udemy for learning some of the best iPad software out there, check out my page down below, linked in the description and the comments. Procreate, Affinity Designer, all sorts of stuff. Check it out. The iPad Pro update is underwhelming. Nobody needs that camera on an iPad. This one gets a big meh from me. Okay, I'll give you that. This is not the most exciting hardware update we have ever seen. I mean, the coolest part of the new iPad Pro isn't the iPad itself, but the fancy keyboard cover, and that's not even gonna show up until May. There's so many questions about it. Does it really float? Will the hinge actually hold it up? Can I pull the iPad off without it moving? Will all those magnets accidentally erase my memory cards? So let's take a look at this iPad. Let's roll through the improvements. First, we have a new processor. They're calling it the A12Z bionic chip. Now, this is replacing the last chip, which is the A12X bionic chip. Second, we have an upgraded camera along the back. It has a wide-angle lens and an ultra-wide-angle lens and a lidar sensor. Lidar, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's a laser on the back of your iPad. We also have a nice storage bump now. The entry-level iPad is starting at 128 gigs. Better Wi-Fi, the ability to shoot 4K video, and studio-quality microphones. And this is what the mic sounds like. Pretty good. Nothing wrong with any of these features, but the real question is, why would anyone upgrade? Well, if you have a 2018 iPad Pro, you shouldn't. The iPad Pro has been on a pretty consistent 18-month refresh cycle since it first came out, and it was due for an update. This is really for anyone who's new to the world of iPads, or maybe has an older iPad that wants to upgrade to the Pro. This is the one to get. Or if you just love this form factor, you could probably now go out and find a discounted or refurbished older model that still works amazingly well for a lower price. Time for this bend test. 3, 2, 1. I'm just kidding. I can't afford to trash a new iPad. Other people can though, and it doesn't look like there's been any structural changes to the iPad this year. I'm really not that worried about it. I've had my 2018 iPad for a year and a half. I haul it everywhere. It's gone on trains, planes, and automobiles. Well, not trains, but I do always keep it in Apple's portfolio case, which I have to think helps. Let's talk about this processor a little bit. There is no doubt here that the A12Z bionic chip is impressive. It has 8 cores, it's the best ARM chip you can get on an iPad, it rocks the benchmarks, and Apple comes right out and says that this thing is more powerful than most laptops. I'm just gonna take Apple at their word here. iPad apps, at least the ones I use, are optimized to run on far, far less. For example, Procreate runs amazingly well on the low-end $329 iPad. There are some trade-offs in terms of how many layers you can use. That has more to do with the amount of RAM that's available on that iPad than it does the processor. Speaking of RAM, the most important upgrade for me is that jump from 4 gigabytes to 6 gigabytes. That's definitely going to help out your drawing applications. Procreate, for example, should, at least in theory, be getting more layers because of that. On Twitter, they said they're looking into it. Right now, Procreate is locked at 91 layers when you try to use the default screen size on this iPad, just like the 2018 iPad is. Because they are looking into it, I expect that to change in a future update. Also, Procreate, which is usually rock solid for me, has been pretty crashy while I've been using it. In fact, you may notice that several times in the speed draw running in the background of the video. It seems to happen most when I'm using the color fill tool. But hopefully that's something that's also cleaned up in a future update. I'm sure there are a lot of applications out there that do need this kind of processing power, but for drawing and art apps, it's really overkill. At least you can take heart knowing that this thing is still gonna run fine years from now. What about that camera? You have a wide angle and an ultra wide angle camera on the back of this thing. That third camera is actually not a camera. It's the lidar sensor for AR. There were a lot of reports that Apple wanted to do a live event, but due to health concerns, they decided wisely, of course, that just wasn't an option for this year. It feels to me like the camera and the lidar sensor got the short end of that stick. Apple rarely puts something into the hardware just to have it there. When they have something like this sensor, they usually base bake in some functionality to show off what can be done with it, give real-world examples of its use. This is an area where that lidar scanner really could use a good demonstration, especially since a lot of the AR examples that I've personally seen in the past have been kind of underwhelming. I'm just really curious, what does Apple have planned for this expensive little sensor that they've stuck in the back of their new iPad? I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some cool applications for it at the online-only WWDC this year. So am I really that unimpressed? At this point, it really does sound like I don't like this thing, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. It's just that the things I really like about this iPad were all present in the last generation model. And I absolutely love my 2018 iPad Pro. First, I've always been a big fan of Apple's more squared off designs. They're easier to hold and grip than the softer, rounded edges of the old iPads or even the newer iPhones. Now, this new squared off design does have a very practical reason for existing. It was rolled out to accommodate the new style of pencil charging, where the flat edge of the pencil magnetically sticks to the edge of the iPad and automatically charges it. The pencil, not the iPad. And that was by far my favorite feature in the 2018 iPad Pro. Before, my pencil was always running out of juice. My productivity would grind to a halt because I would need to charge my pencil every 20 minutes, half hour. Even though it charges pretty fast, it was still pretty jarring when you were in the zone and being fairly productive. Now that pencil lives on my iPad, it rarely drops below 50%. In fact, I can only think of 1 or 2 times in the last year and a half that it actually got down to 0 and died, and that was more my fault for not putting it along the side of the iPad and having it sit on my desk for days on end. There's other stuff I like here too. The screen is beautiful. The colors are vibrant. There's a 120 hertz refresh rate. All of these things are fantastic. These things don't necessarily change your drawing experience that much, but taken together, they do make a nice little upgrade over the less expensive iPads Apple sells. Plus, they've got the USB Type-C port, the ability to attach things like external storage or peripherals. Those things come in handy too. But for any artist or illustrator, really the meat of this is how it works with the Apple Pencil. And the Apple Pencil still is, always has been fantastic. It's just great to draw with. It's accurate, it's crisp, the pressure feels amazing. It's just a really top of the line tool and always has been. Like I mentioned before, magnetically connects to the top of the iPad for charging. Stays on there pretty well too. It's important to note that the Pencil does not come with the iPad Pro. It is another $130. And if you've been wondering if it might be worth getting the cheaper first generation Apple Pencil, it won't work with these newer iPad Pros. That's not Apple being a jerk, that's just because they changed the way that the Pencil pairs and charges with the newer iPads. What about those cheaper styluses that promise a lot for a fraction of the price? Again, don't bother. Those are laggy and they're frustrating, and if you're gonna spend the money on an iPad Pro, go the extra mile and get the Apple Pencil. It is the only iPad stylus that is worth using, period. What about Sidecar? Sidecar is just okay. I mean, it is a great second screen. So if you want to use your iPad with your Mac as a second screen, absolutely go for it. It's fantastic for that. My problem has always been the Apple Pencil integration. It just feels a little bit slow. It feels a little bit laggy. If you use it for more than 30 seconds, you'll totally see what I mean. It just feels just a fraction of a bit off. This is basically to say everything I talked about in my Sidecar review last fall still stands in terms of drawing experience today. Are there any downsides to drawing on the iPad Pro? And yes, there is one big downside, at least for me, and that is the iPad Pro is this shiny, beautiful glass screen. The Apple Pencil is this plasticky, tipped pencil. When you put plastic on glass, it's really slick. You don't have a lot of drawing control. It feels very different than drawing on a piece of paper where there is a little bit of texture and there is a little bit of drawing resistance. There's also the downside of getting finger oil on your screen, which means the drag becomes even more inconsistent when you're drawing on it. I always put some kind of matte screen protector on my iPads just because it feels so much better to draw with. There is a trade-off to those screen protectors though. It does refract some of the color, it does dull some of the color, gives it a slightly grainy, almost rainbowy feel if you're moving it around and looking at the screen from certain angles. I personally am more than happy to make that trade-off to get that better drawing experience, but if color accuracy is your thing, that might drive you nuts. iOS keeps improving. It did take me a while to get used to the hand gestures and lack of a face button on the iPad, but now all of those things are second nature. The one problem with the iPad's UI is that a lot of these things aren't really discoverable, if you know what I mean. You have to know that swiping from the bottom left corner of your screen makes a screenshot, or that you could put multiple apps in the slide over and toggle between them. If you're brand new to the iPad, or you just haven't really explored this stuff, it's definitely worth taking a look at some of the tutorials on YouTube about how to use all the touch gestures, because there's so many little things hidden in the interface of the iPad Pro. A new iPad OS 13.4 dropped the day this iPad came out. The main reason is that they updated trackpad support for the upcoming iPad keyboard that's coming in May. Since it is out early, you can try it out. I connected my Magic Trackpad to this thing to take it for a roll, and it's pretty good. It feels best when it's paired with a keyboard. Art apps really don't take advantage of this because the update literally just came out. But I can see Affinity Designer really being a big upgrade, since vector apps are much more useful oftentimes when you're using a keyboard or mouse. It's just more accurate. That's definitely something I'll be keeping my eye on over the next several months and seeing if those updates are forthcoming. I like that the mouse here isn't just a pointer like it is on Samsung DeX when you plug an Android phone into a monitor. You can tell Apple took what they learned from the last version of iPad OS and thought through this hybrid mouse touchscreen thing before pushing this release out. Buttons become highlights. App icons get kind of touchy wiggly when you mouse over them. And right now, I'm not finding this touchpad super useful, but I'm glad it's here. It has a ton of upside, and as developers start designing around it, the usability is only gonna get better and better. Which iPad is right for you? This is the eternal question. I will say this. If you're going to be drawing large scale files, like full-size comic book pages, and you want lots of layers and lots of stuff, the iPad Pro is definitely the way to go. And the reason why is it just has more RAM than some of the lower end models of iPads, which allows you more layers when you're drawing in apps like Procreate. If you're drawing in other apps where that isn't necessarily a problem, the apps will just crash less often. Looking at you, Adobe Fresco. But beyond that, I still think the $329 standard issue iPad with an Apple Pencil is a phenomenal deal. A lot of the features that are only available on the iPad Pro, like the charging and the nicer screen, things like that, yeah, they're great to have. But do you need them? No, you really don't. Another common question I get is this a PC replacement? Can this replace my computer? This one is a hard question. For some people, it's gonna be yes. For most people, I still think it's gonna be no. I personally am on team no. For me, the iPad is a companion device. I use it in conjunction with my computer. It's my mobile sketchpad. It's my main art creation tool. I do a lot of writing on it with the keyboard cover, but for work, I'm still on my laptop. Now, granted, a lot of my work nowadays is video editing, which is just gonna be a lot faster, smoother, easier on a laptop. A huge part of it for me is file management and multitasking. You can multitask on an iPad, I know, but that's really light multitasking. It's hard to have multiple Photoshop documents open at once and working in between them. In fact, it's just flat out impossible. Or just moving many files at once. Though it's better than it used to, it's still a little bit clunky. I like a good Finder window. I will say this, it is light years better than it was just 2 years ago. And since it is better and it does keep improving for some folks, that's gonna be good enough. This is one of those areas where I feel like I might have to break this out into a separate video at some point just to do a deeper dive into how I actually use this for my day-to-day workflow. Just because the answer to this question, can it replace your PC, is a lot more complex than you should try this app or did you know this feature exists. It really goes down to the core of how the iPad is designed. The other question I get a lot is which size iPad should I get? This obviously comes in two sizes. There's the 11-inch and there's the 12.9. Again, I personally really like the 12.9. I like the bigger area that I can draw on. The nice thing about most iPad apps, though, is that there isn't a lot of cruft. There isn't a lot of extra like panels and graphics and stuff in the drawing and design apps. Most of them are kind of hidden away. So no matter which size iPad, even down to the mini, there's still a lot of drawing space available for you there. So which one is better? There's no real answer to that. That's something you're going to have to answer yourself. So that, my friends, is the iPad Pro. If you have any comments or questions or want to check out my online courses, there are links to all that down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.